In this lecture, we're going to explore the case where we are setting up return type deduction with our function split into declaration and definition. And let's look at a simple example here. We have a max function and we have the declaration in front of main here, and we're going to have the definition after the main function. This is what we have been doing, but if you want, you can even split this across multiple files. It is going to work equally well. But the problem here is that we just have a function declaration in front of the main function. And for auto type deduction to work, the compiler has to see the definition of the function and look at your return statements. But what we have in front of the main function is just a declaration. It's just a header or a prototype of the function, and the compiler can't see your return statement from that. And this is going to give you a compiler error because the compiler doesn't have a way to deduce your return type here, and you're going to get a compiler error. If you want for auto type deduction to work with return types from functions, you will have to put your full definition in front of the main function for the compiler to have a chance to look at your return statement. Hopefully, this is making sense. And this is going to be the case regardless of whether you are doing naked auto type deduction or even deducing references from your return values. You will have to put the full definition before the moment where you call the function here. For example, we are calling the function in main here. The function definition has to show up somewhere before this line here, and it should show up in front of main. And if we do that, we're not going to have any problem. Auto type deduction is going to work. This lecture is just meant to make you aware of this, because if you don't know this behavior, this is going to bite you and you want to know what is going wrong. You're going to say, okay, my function is set up right. Why am I getting a compiler error? Why isn't my code compiling? We're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with us a little more. Okay, here we are in our working folder. The current project is function definitions with return type deductions. I think this is pretty long, but we're going to use this name, no big deal. So we're going to grab our template files and we're going to put them in place. And we're going to open this guy in Visual Studio Code by simply dragging and dropping on top of Visual Studio Code here. This is going to open our folder and we're going to be able to clean our main CPP file up. And we're going to close the left pane here. We don't need it. The first thing we want to do is to put in a function which is doing return type deduction. You see our auto reference max function here. But what we're going to do in this lecture is try and split this into function definition and function declaration. The definition is going to show up after the main function here, and the declaration should come in front here. Okay, so we're going to grab our header here and use that to set up a declaration. We're going to copy this and we're going to put that in place and add our semicolon. And if we go in main and try to use this, we're going to say int reference and say int ref equals max. Let's put in two variables. Let's say int x and put in 5, for example, and say int y and put in a 9. And we pass x and y to our function here. Let's do that and put our semicolon. And if we try to compile this program, we're going to get something wrong. So let's try and do that. We're going to build with GCC and we're going to see that we have an error. Terminal process terminated with exit code -1. The build wasn't successful. And the problem here is that use of auto max before deduction of auto. The message is the compiler is not going to find the definition to be able to do proper auto return type deduction. And for return type deduction to work, the compiler has to see the full definition of the function before the point where you call the function here. And again, the reason is the compiler needs to look at your return statements to be able to do proper return type deduction. It's going to look at this return A. It's going to say, this guy is returning an int reference. It's going to look at return B. It's going to say this guy is returning an int reference. I am going to deduce an int reference. But if what you have in front of the main function is just a declaration, the compiler doesn't have this information. The definition is going to be brought in at the linker stage, but we are doing auto return type deduction at the compiler stage. And if we want return type deduction to work for our functions here, we have no choice. We have to take the full definition and make that show up in front of the main function here. And this is going to work. So let's try and build now. This is going to work because it is exactly what we had in the last lecture. But one other thing I want you to see is that this is going to be the case even if you are not doing reference deduction here. Let's take out the ampersand symbol and do naked return type deduction here. And if we try to build, we're going to get the same error. You can't do any kind of return type deduction with your functions split into declarations and definitions here. If you want this to work, you will have to make your entire definition show up in front of the main function here. Or to be exact, it has to show up before the point where you call the function here. If we build, we're going to get a compiler error because we are doing a non-reference deduction here and we are trying to assign this to a reference. But we can take out this ref here, for example, and call this int val. It is going to deduce correctly and our program is now going to compile fine. Let's prove that the build is good. We can clear. And if we run this program, we're not going to see anything because we're really not printing anything. But the message is, if you want auto return type deduction to work for your functions, your function definitions should show up in front of the main function, or to be exact, they should show up before the point where you call your function, which is doing return type deduction here. Okay, if you have your function definition in front, everything is going to work fine and your code is going to compile like we see here. Let's compile again and really prove this to you. The build is good and we are all fine. This is really all we set out to do in this lecture. I hope you found it interesting. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about optional output from functions. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.